What happens when a self-made CEO walks into one of his own auto shops undercover only to find his employees risking their lives because they can't afford the gear they need? Mason Fuller had built his auto repair business from a single garage in East Texas to a network of 9 busy shops across the state. He still remembered the early days changing oil in 100-degree heat, eating peanut butter sandwiches on a toolbox. But now, with a corporate office, district managers, and layers of middle management, Mason hadn't turned a wrench in years. Then came the customer complaints. Nothing major, just a few low-star reviews online from a shop in San Marcos. One guy said he'd waited 2 hours for a simple tire rotation. Another claimed the techs looked exhausted and pissed off. A woman wrote that she didn't feel safe waiting in the lobby because of a shouting match between staff in the back. Mason didn't like relying on reports anymore. Numbers didn't show culture. He needed to see it for himself. He didn't tell anyone at corporate, just said he was taking a short vacation. He shaved his beard, dyed his hair darker, slapped on a pair of cheap glasses, and changed into a faded shirt and busted jeans. When he walked into Shop 4 in San Marcos, nobody gave him a second look. "Name's Mason," he said to the front desk girl. "I'm here for the open trainee spot." The manager, a guy in his mid-30s named Darryl, looked him up and down. "You got any actual experience or just YouTube?" "Did a little work in a garage back in high school," Mason replied. "I can learn fast," Darryl shrugged. "Fine, we're short anyway. One of our guys quit last week and another's out with a busted knee." That explained the staff shortage. Mason was in. The first thing he noticed was how hot the bay was, no fans. The second thing he noticed: everyone looked dead tired. There were only 3 techs, working one of them a kid who couldn't have been older than 20, another an older man with a limp, and the third a slim guy with a shaved head and grease-streaked hands, maybe mid-20s. "Yo, Mason, follow Theo," Darryl called out. "He'll show you around." Theo gave a weak smile and handed Mason a pair of gloves. "They'll rip in a day, but better than nothing." Mason followed Theo through the routine, changing oil, rotating tires, replacing brake pads. Theo was sharp, patient, and fast. But what Mason couldn't ignore was how Theo kept wiping sweat from his face, with a bandaged, cracked hand. "You all right, man?" Mason asked quietly after they finished a brake job. Theo glanced around. "Yeah, not really." "But it is what it is." "What happened to your hand?" "Burnt it last week," Theo said, trying to brush it off. "Didn't have gloves, still don't really." "These," he held up the torn gloves, "there from the dollar store." Mason frowned. "Why not get proper gear?" Theo hesitated. "I tried. But the shop don't supply it. They say it's our responsibility. And I got rent, a baby at home, and barely enough to eat. So, yeah." Mason stopped cold. "Wait, they don't give you safety gear?" Theo shook his head like it was just normal. "Nah, man," Darryl said, "we gotta buy our own." "Said it's policy. Said if I don't like it, I can leave." Mason clenched his jaw but nodded slowly. "Got it." He didn't say another word about it, but inside he was boiling. Later that day, a customer came in with a Corvette and asked for a quick tune-up. Darryl barked at Theo to drop what he was doing and handle it. Theo jogged over, already limping from standing on the hard concrete all day. Darryl turned to Mason. "You grab the mop. The floor's filthy." Mason did it without a word. But he watched how Darryl barked orders, didn't lift a finger to help, and disappeared into his office for half an hour. By closing time, Mason's back was aching, his shirt soaked through, and his hands raw. Theo was still working on a transmission. "You staying late?" Mason asked. "Yeah," Theo said. "Boss wants it done tonight. My girl's gonna be pissed, but can't risk getting cut." Mason nodded. "You've got a kid, right?" "Yeah, 2 months old, Caleb." Mason swallowed hard. "You ever think of quitting?" Theo laughed softly. "Every day." "But if I quit, who's gonna feed my son?" Mason didn't sleep that night. He sat in his motel room, staring at the wall. He'd built this company. This was his shop. And here was a guy burning his hands to feed his kid because no one would give him a $10 pair of gloves. Tomorrow he'd dig deeper. And soon, Everyone was going to know exactly who Mason Fuller really was. By the second morning, Mason didn't need to fake the soreness in his knees. He was already limping slightly when he walked in, and his arms ached from lifting wheels and brake calipers the day before. The front desk girl, Jessie, gave him a short nod, less curious than yesterday. He was just another body in the shop now. Darryl was in the office again, leaning back in the worn chair with his boots on the desk. He didn't look up when Mason walked past. Theo was already under a car, a 2008 Silverado. His forearms were wrapped in gauze now, not fresh bandages, but rewrapped ones that were already beginning to darken. Mason noticed he was using a flathead screwdriver in place of a pry bar. "Where's the bar?" Mason asked, kneeling beside him. Theo didn't turn. "We don't have one that fits the larger axles. Got stripped a month ago. No replacement." "Why not?" Theo's voice was even. "Darryl says corporate's being cheap. Told us to adapt." Mason didn't respond. He helped hold the axle while Theo worked the bolt free. The tool slipped once, nearly slicing across Theo's wrist. He hissed but didn't stop. Once the job was done, Mason cleaned up and slipped into the back room where the tools were kept. He scanned the shelves, noting what was missing: no torque wrenches calibrated in the last year, half the sockets rusted, and a jack stand with a cracked weld on it shoved behind a bin. He turned as the older tech, the one with the limp, stepped inside. "You the new guy?" he asked, rubbing his shoulder. "Yeah, Mason, you." "Name's Curtis. Been here since it opened." Curtis grabbed a pair of needle nose pliers, then paused. "Just so you know, Darryl doesn't like people pocking around back here." "Why?" Curtis shrugged. "He's real territorial, doesn't want anyone messin' with inventory." Mason kept his tone flat. "Does he do the ordering?" "Supposed to." "But I ain't seen a new ratchet in 6 months. Curtis looked over his shoulder, then lowered his voice. "He'll tell you we're broke, but he got a new truck last week. Nice one. Lift kit, chrome rims, real flashy." "Must be doing all right," Mason said. Curtis nodded once, then left. Mason stood there for a long moment, then walked out to the lot. By early afternoon, the temperature had climbed past 90. The AC in the front lobby was barely working, and the back bays were an oven. Jessie had brought in a small fan from home, but it only moved hot air around. Mason noticed she kept stepping outside during lulls just to breathe. A woman in her 60s came in for an oil change. Jessie greeted her politely and wrote up the ticket, but when she passed it to Darryl, he barely glanced at it. "She can wait." "We're behind." Jessie hesitated. "She's been here twice this month. She said the oil light keeps coming on." Darryl rolled his eyes. "Then maybe she should learn how to drive." The woman, who had overheard, looked down at her hands and said nothing. Mason clenched his jaw. He walked over to Theo. "Want me to take that one?" he asked. Theo looked surprised, then nodded. "Yeah, Bay 3's open." The woman smiled faintly when Mason waved her over. As he worked, he noticed the oil pan plug had been cross-threaded. Whoever had done the last change had forced it in sideways. It was leaking slowly. He walked back inside and held the plug up to Jessie. "Who did her last change?" She checked the tablet. "Looks like Jose. He used to be here. Quit 3 weeks ago." "She's been back twice for the same issue." Jessie nodded. "I told Darryl. He said it wasn't our problem anymore." Mason didn't say anything. He just grabbed a proper tap kit from the toolbox and fixed the threads before replacing the plug. When he told the woman what had been wrong, she looked surprised. "No one told me that before," she said. Mason shook his head. "It's fixed now, no charge." "But he held up a hand. "We caused the problem, you shouldn't pay for our mistake." She left quietly, but her eyes were damp. Jessie stepped over. "You're not going to get in trouble for that. If I do, it's worth it," Mason said. Later, while mopping up a spill near the alignment rack, Mason overheard Darryl on the phone in the office. His voice was low, but the walls were thin. "Nah, I told him we didn't have the budget. Look, I'm not spending $800 on new lifts when the old ones still work. And no, don't send anyone down here. I've got it under control." A pause. "Yeah, they're complaining, but what else is new? They'll show up tomorrow. They always do." Darryl laughed, then hung up. Mason stepped away before the door opened. Around 5, a young guy with a parts delivery uniform dropped off a crate. Darryl signed the sheet, then reached into the kid's pocket and pulled out a vape pen. "Hey, what the hell?" the kid said. Darryl grinned. "No smoking on my property." "I wasn't even. You want me to report you to your boss." The kid backed off, furious but silent. Darryl tossed the pen in the trash and walked off. Theo muttered under his breath. "He does that all the time. Picks fights just to feel in charge." When Mason walked to the back room again, he noticed a clipboard hanging half behind the door. It listed hours worked for each employee. He scanned the names. Theo, 58 hours last week. Curtis, 52. Jesse, 47, all on front desk and phones. Darryl, 29. Next to Darryl's name was a handwritten note. Admin hours remote. Mason took a picture with his phone and slipped it back. That night, he didn't go back to the motel. He drove to a different shop 2 in New Braunfels unannounced. It was late, but the lights were still on. The manager there, Rosa, was finishing paperwork. She looked up, surprised. "Mason," he stepped in and closed the door. "Need a favor." "Quiet one." "Of course." He showed her the photos, the burned gloves, the torn equipment list, the payroll sheet. Her face tightened. "That's not how we run things. I need to know if this is just shop 4 or if it's happening anywhere else. I can check with a few people." "Quietly, do it." She paused. "You going to pull the plug on him?" "Not yet, but I'm close." By the time Mason drove back, the sun had set and his hands were trembling on the wheel. He wasn't angry anymore, he was ashamed. He'd built a system that let men like Darryl thrive because he'd stopped looking. Now the people he should have protected were paying for it. Tomorrow, that would change. Mason arrived at the shop before sunrise. The parking lot was empty except for Theo's faded sedan, its backseat piled with a car seat and a duffel bag. A small blanket had been stuffed into the window to block the light. Theo was inside, head resting against the steering wheel, asleep. Mason tapped on the glass gently. Theo jerked upright, blinking. "Didn't mean to scare you," Mason said. Theo rubbed his eyes, then reached for the door. "It's all right, just couldn't sleep at home. Figured I'd get here early, beat the heat." Mason didn't respond. He unlocked the shop door and let them in. The fluorescent lights flickered on, casting a pale glow over the work bays. For a minute they stood in silence. "You ever think about doing something else?" Mason asked. Theo gave a short laugh. "If I could afford school, I'd go, but I never finished high school. Dropped out when my mom got sick." Mason nodded once. "You ever tell Darryl that?" Theo shook his head. "Doesn't matter to him. He just wants us to say yes and keep our mouths shut." Curtis arrived next, limping slightly more than the day before. He raised a hand in greeting and went straight to his locker. Jessie came in 20 minutes later, carrying a jug of water and a small fan under her arm. "Brought another one," she told Theo. "Put it by the tire machine. You nearly passed out yesterday." Theo took it with a tired smile. "You're a lifesaver." By 8, the bays were full, and the noise had started: engine revs, impact wrenches, and the constant hum of the alignment rack. Mason was replacing a serpentine belt when a black SUV pulled up front. A man in a blue button-down shirt with a company badge clipped to his belt stepped out and walked inside. Jessie glanced up from the desk. "Can I help you?" "Yeah, I'm looking for Darryl. I'm from Regional Ops." Jessie pointed toward the office. "Through there." Mason watched as the man disappeared behind the door. A few minutes later, Darryl came out looking irritated. His eyes scanned the shop, then landed on Mason. "You, come with me." Mason wiped his hands and followed him back inside. Darryl closed the door behind them. "You've been asking a lot of questions." Mason didn't answer. "Curtis said you were snooping around the back. Jessie says you've been talking to customers too much. This isn't some charity, you're here to work." Mason leaned against the filing cabinet. "You talked to Curtis?" Darryl crossed his arms. "I talk to everyone. That's how you keep a shop in line. You don't give them too much rope." "You replacing broken tools anytime soon?" Darryl narrowed his eyes. "You don't get to ask that." Mason stared at him, quiet. "You want to stay here, you keep your head down." I don't care if you think you're smarter than the rest of him. You're not. And if you're trying to stir stuff up, I'll make sure you're out the door before lunch." Mason's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and slid it back in. "Got it," he said. "I'll keep my head down." Darrell gave a satisfied nod. "Good, now get back out there. We've got a full board." Mason stepped out. The moment the door closed behind him, he walked past the bays and out into the parking lot. Rosa was waiting there, leaning against her car. "I pulled the numbers," she said. "Your San Marcos location is the only one with a 3-month straight drop in customer retention, and more than half the warranty complaints last quarter came from here." Mason folded his arms. "What about payroll? He's underreporting hours." "I had 2 of my guys cross-check his timesheets with their system logins. They were clocking in at 7 and he was reporting 9. Mason looked back at the building. "You talked to HR?" "I went to Michelle. She said Darrell's been flagged twice before for conduct issues, yelling at staff, threatening to dock pay. Nothing ever stuck because he's slick with paperwork." "He's done here," Mason said quietly. Rosa nodded. "Want me in there when you do it?" "No. I need them to hear it from me." They walked back inside. Rosa peeled off toward the back bays, chatting with Curtis while pretending to inspect a lift. Mason walked to the middle of the shop floor and raised his voice. "Can I get everyone's attention for a second?" The noise tapered off. Jesse looked up from the desk. Theo wiped his hands on a rag. Curtis leaned against the toolbox, curious. Darrell stepped out of the office. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Mason turned to face him. "I think it's time they know who I am." Darrell frowned. "What are you talking about?" Mason reached into his pocket and pulled out his ID badge. The one he hadn't used in 3 days, the one with his real name and title, Mason Fuller. "I own this company." Silence. Jesse blinked. Theo took a step back. Curtis straightened, his face unreadable. Darrell's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mason stepped closer. "I built this business from the ground up, and I walked into this shop because I didn't trust the reports I was getting. Turns out I was right not to." He looked around the room before continuing. "I've watched employees bring their own safety gear because this shop refuses to provide it. I've seen tools held together with duct tape. I've seen people working in conditions that are not only unsafe, but in direct violation of company policies." He turned to Darrell now. "You're done." Darrell's face turned red. "You can't just, I can, and I am. You're terminated effective immediately. Rosa will oversee the transition. You're not to step foot in this shop again." "You don't understand." "I understand exactly. You knowingly falsified time sheets. You denied basic safety measures. You threatened employees. You humiliated customers. That's not just a violation of our code, it's a disgrace." Darrell's jaw clenched. He shot a look toward Jesse, who immediately looked away. "You'll be escorted off the premises." "Rosa?" Rosa stepped forward. "Let's go." Darrell hesitated, then turned and stormed into the office. Rosa followed. The shop was silent. Mason turned back to the others. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see what was happening here. I should have been paying closer attention. That ends now." He looked at each of them. "No more buying your own gloves. No more working with broken tools. No more skipped breaks or threats or silence. Starting today, this shop gets what it needs." Theo stared at him. "You're really the owner?" Mason nodded. Theo took a breath, then said, "I got a question. Go ahead. You gonna be around, or is this just a one-time cleanup?" Mason looked him straight in the eye. "I'll be back next week, not as a boss, just another guy in the bay." Theo nodded slowly. Jessie exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing. Curtis walked over and held out his hand. Mason took it. "Glad you came," Curtis said. "Me too," Mason replied. In the corner, a delivery guy stepped in with a box of parts. He looked around, confused by the silence. Mason turned to Jessie. "You want to take 5?" She blinked. "We don't usually. You do now, all of you. Hydrate. Cool down. I'll handle the paperwork." As the crew slowly stepped away from their stations, Mason grabbed the mop and headed for the spill near the lift. He didn't need to do it. But he wanted them to see he still remembered how, and that this time he wouldn't forget. The next morning, Mason returned to shop 4 in plain clothes, no disguise. The air felt different. The usual morning clatter was subdued, replaced by a kind of cautious quiet. Everyone was there. Theo, Curtis, Jesse, and all of them paused when they saw him walk through the door. Mason didn't raise his voice or call a meeting. Instead, he headed straight to the back bay, rolled up his sleeves, and grabbed a torque wrench from the rack. It was still rusted, same as the day before. He set it down and went to Theo, who was tightening lug nuts on a Civic. "New equipment arrives by Friday," Mason said. "Rosa's handling the orders. If there's anything you've been working without, now's the time to speak up." Theo tightened the last nut, then stood up slowly. "We need a proper jack for SUVs. Ours sticks halfway up, almost dropped a Highlander yesterday." Mason glanced over at the lift in question. "Done." "What else?" Theo hesitated. "We've been splitting one tire gauge between 3 bays, and the air compressor leaks." Mason nodded and walked over to Curtis, who was sorting brake rotors by hand. "What are you doing that for?" Mason asked. "The scanner's been down since March." "Can't tell what's warped unless I eye it. We'll replace it. You shouldn't be guessing on safety." Curtis didn't say anything, but he gave a small nod and kept working. Mason moved through each bay, noting the missing tools, the worn-out equipment, and the quick-fix solutions the techs had learned to live with. Every corner told a story of neglect, improvisation, and quiet endurance. By mid-morning, the shop was humming again. Not perfectly, nothing changed overnight, but there was less tension. Jessie no longer glanced over her shoulder before asking a question. Curtis wasn't rushing between jobs. And Theo, while still moving quickly, didn't look like he was waiting for the next blow to fall. Mason met Rosa outside the building near the loading dock. "How's it going inside?" she asked. "They're steady, holding it together." "Daryl's gone quiet. HR said he didn't contest the termination, probably knew he wouldn't win." "Good," Mason said. "I want the team to know that chapter's closed." Rosa handed him a clipboard. "Here's the equipment replacement list. I added a few extras. Fire extinguishers, floor fans, first aid kits. None of it's been updated in over a year." Mason signed off without hesitation. "Anything else?" A few of the techs at other shops heard what happened. Word spreading. Mason looked at her. "Let it. Maybe it'll remind some people what we stand for." Inside, Jessie was helping a customer with a misfiring engine. The woman was nervous, flipping through her phone as she spoke. "We can run diagnostics for free," Jessie said. "It'll take 15 minutes. If it's a spark issue, we'll let you know before we touch anything." The woman blinked. "You're not charging just to look at it." "Not anymore," Jessie said. "Owner's orders." The woman nodded slowly. "That's different," Jessie smiled. "Yeah, we're working on that." Later that afternoon, Mason gathered the team briefly in the break area. It wasn't a formal meeting, just a circle of folding chairs and a pot of coffee someone had started but never finished. "I know yesterday was a lot," he said. "And I know some of you are waiting to see if this is real or just a show." Nobody said a word, but nobody looked away either. "I didn't come here just to fire someone and disappear. I'm staying involved. Weekly check-ins, direct reporting to me. If something's broken, tools, policies, people, you bring it straight up." Curtis leaned forward. "And if someone higher up tries to shut us down again," "They won't," Mason said. "But if they do, you call me. No middlemen." Theo asked, "You planning to do this at the other shops too?" Mason nodded. "One at a time, quietly, but it starts here." "You're not the only shop that's been stretched thin." Jessie crossed her arms. "It's not just tools. We've had no one on phones during lunch for months. Daryl said we didn't need the coverage. Starting next week, we're hiring a part-time assistant for the desk. You'll get your break." Curtis tilted his head. "You're serious about all this?" "Dead serious," Mason said. "I didn't build this company to watch it grind people down." A silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind that settles just before something new starts. The next few days were all about groundwork. Rosa stayed on site to handle operations while Mason split his time between the shop floor and the back office. He reviewed every repair order from the last 3 months. He found patterns, repeat issues, rushed diagnostics, even a few jobs that had been billed without proper documentation. Nothing illegal, but careless. Signs of a manager who had stopped caring. Jessie spent her time training the new hire who arrived Thursday. A quiet young guy named Julian with billing experience and a calm voice that customers immediately trusted. Within an hour, the ringing phones stopped stacking up. Theo, meanwhile, stayed late without being asked. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to finish a suspension install the right way. When Mason offered to help, Theo handed him a wrench without a word. Their rhythm was easy now. On Friday, the delivery van arrived with 3 large pallets, new compressors, diagnostic gear, and a fresh set of jack stands. Curtis watched the crew unload with folded arms. "Those the good ones?" he asked. "Top of the line," Mason said. "Lifetime warranty." "No more guessing," Curtis muttered. "About damn time." That afternoon, Mason called Theo into the office. It was the first time since the reveal that Theo had sat in the manager's chair, even temporarily. "I've been thinking," Mason said. "This place needs a lead tech. Someone who knows the work and understands people." Theo raised an eyebrow. "You offering me Daryl's job?" "Not exactly. I'm offering you something better. Lead tech, not manager. You keep your hands in the work, but you help guide the team. Pay bump, training stipend, and full benefits starting next month." Theo leaned back. "Why me?" "Because you didn't leave, even when you should have." Theo looked away for a moment, then back. "If I take it, I want 2 things. Name them." "Safety gear stocked." "And breaks that actually happen." "Done." Theo stood and offered his hand. Mason took it. Late that evening, the shop closed on time. For the first time all week, nobody lingered out of obligation. Jessie packed up without rushing. Curtis whistled on his way out. Julian locked the front door with practiced ease. Mason stayed behind a few minutes longer. He stood in the middle of the bay, looking around not at the equipment but at the space itself. It looked cleaner. Not polished but cared for. As he walked out, he passed Theo, who was wiping down his toolbox. "You heading out?" Mason asked. "Yeah, my kid's rolling over now, can't miss that." "Take Monday off. Paid." Theo blinked, surprised. "Seriously, you'll want the sleep after Sunday." "That's when the real noise starts." "What's happening Sunday?" "I'm visiting Shop 5, unannounced." Theo gave a quiet laugh. "They won't know what hit them." Mason pulled the door shut behind him. This time he wasn't walking away, he was just getting started.